It was a typical Saturday in a remote corner of Missouri. The morning air was crisp mist still lingering over the wild fields. Dust-covered pickup trucks lined the gravel lot of the Wexler auction yard, a broad stretch of land with old tin-roofed pens and rows of makeshift sheds. Farmers in cowboy hats and worn leather boots gathered around the coffee stand, clutching steaming paper cups. Some chatted idly, others stood in silence, their eyes cold and hard. Inside the auction house, the atmosphere shifted. Iron gates formed a central sale ring where animals were led in one by one for bidding. The crackling loudspeaker barked the auctioneer's weary calls, blending with the moos of cattle, the bleats of distressed calves, and the occasional snicker of men who saw livestock as nothing more than commodities. This was not a place for mercy. Every animal had a price, and those who were injured, old, or useless were sold off without hesitation, discarded like broken tools. By late morning, the bidding rolled on briskly. An old dairy cow for $150, a wild Mustang, $200, a miscarried nanny goat for $40. No one shed a tear. No one questioned what would happen to them after this gate closed. At 11 o'clock, a burly man in a sweat-stained gray shirt and thick gloves stepped into the ring, dragging a rusted chain behind him. At the end of that chain was a frail, skinny figure, a black and gray German shepherd, its rear left leg awkwardly wrapped in a dirty strip of cloth, limping with every step. The crowd fell silent. The dog's name was Max, but no one there knew it, and none cared to ask. To them, he was just the lame dog, a worthless creature. The auctioneer cleared his throat and announced through the mic, voice hoarse, "Next up, male German shepherd about 3 years old. Injured hind leg. Previous owner can't keep him. Starting bid $25. No one moved. Max stood in the ring, trembling slightly, head hung low, eyes vacant. His fur was matted and dusty ears drooped with pain and fear. Despite looking like he could collapse at any moment, he remained standing, as if sensing that his fate now rested in the hands of strangers. Strangers who didn't see a soul, only a number. The auctioneer waited a moment, then added, "Anyone at 25, that's less than the price of a used saddle. He could still guard a barn or be used as feed for hunting dogs." A few chuckles stirred in the back rows. A bearded man in a baseball cap jeered, "What's a crippled mutt good for waste of dog food?" Someone else chimed in, "Probably sick too. Better off at the slaughterhouse." The auctioneer scanned the room, trying again. $20. Anyone want him? Still no hands. No one looked at Max. Some turned away. Others stared with blank detachment, as if he were nothing more than a defective product on a dusty shelf. No one noticed how Max whimpered softly, dragging himself a few inches forward, as if begging for just one more chance. A cold breeze swept in from the front doors, stirring dry straw on the floor. Max shivered, coughed faintly. The auctioneer sighed and flipped his ledger. "No bids. Moving on to the next." Just as he raised his hand to signal for Max to be led away, a quiet movement rippled through the room. A hand went up from the back row. No one had noticed the man sitting there before. He wore a worn brown leather jacket, a ball cap pulled low over his face, boots caked in mud. Silent, still, but his raised hand cut through the apathy like a knife. $25, the man said calmly, voice steady and clear. The room fell into stunned silence. The auctioneer blinked. "To confirm one bid for $25. The man nodded, stood slowly, and began walking toward the ring. Some eyes followed him, curious or mocking. Someone muttered, "Probably some nut," but the man didn't care. He stepped into the ring and knelt beside Max, moving gently, almost reverently. Their eyes met, man and dog, and though Max trembled, he didn't pull away. In that fragile moment, something shifted. There was recognition, a flicker of hope. The man reached out and placed a hand on Max's head, stroking him softly, saying nothing. He didn't need to. In that single touch, Max felt what words could never express: kindness, safety, a promise. The auctioneer nodded. "Sold for $25 to the gentleman in the back." Laughter rippled faintly across the seats. A few heads shook, and the chatter resumed like nothing had happened. But in that tired, flickering auction ring, under buzzing fluorescent lights, two battered souls quietly exited the place where life had been measured in dollars, not dignity. The breeze stirred again. Max glanced back at the room briefly, then leaned his head into the man's chest. Beneath the ragged fur and shaking ribs, his heart still beat a soft whisper that he was still alive, and perhaps for the first time in his life. Bossy, he had been chosen. Ethan carried Max out of the auction ring as gently as if he were lifting a life just pulled back from the edge of death. His arms wrapped tightly around the dog's frail body, feeling each shallow, trembling breath beneath its rib cage. Under Ethan's worn shirt, Max shivered not from fear, but from sheer exhaustion. Eyes followed them from behind. Some were surprised, others pitying not for Max, but for Ethan. In their eyes, he had just spent money on a broken thing, a crippled animal that would only be a burden. But Ethan didn't care. His old Ford pickup truck sat quietly at the far end of the dirt lot. He gently laid Max on the passenger seat, then pulled off his thick coat and wrapped it around the dog. Max opened his eyes slightly weak, but enough to meet Ethan's gaze. It was a look that seemed to say thank you, even if it couldn't speak. Ethan started the engine. He knew every second might mean the difference between life and death. The digital clock on the dash blinked 11:43 a.m. He revved the engine and backed out, the rear wheels skidding on the damp red earth. The dirt road to the highway twisted and bumped, jostling the truck violently. The sky grew darker, heavy with a storm. Clouds turned lead-gray, rain was coming. Ethan glanced at Max. The dog was limp, his nose resting against the seat edge. His chest rose and fell so faintly it looked like a breeze might be enough to snuff him out. Ethan reached for the radio, not for music, but to fill the terrifying silence. "Max," he whispered, placing a hand on the dog's head. "Can you hear me, buddy? Hang in there, warrior." Warrior, that word echoed in Ethan's mind, dragging up an old memory from deep within. 2010, Kandahar, Afghanistan. What was supposed to be a routine patrol turned deadly. Around a bend, the convoy hit a buried IED. Ethan, then a combat medic, jumped from the vehicle without hesitation. Smoke, screams, gunfire, chaos. He crawled across burning sand and found the youngest soldier, Mark, badly injured, bleeding from his leg and face. Mark cried. He was only 20. Called for his mother on the battlefield. Ethan carried him through the bullets. Both survived, but that night Mark lost a leg. And Ethan, he could never again turn his back on pain or suffering, no matter if it came from a man or a dog. Rain began drumming on the truck's roof like war drums. Ethan's knees stiffened. He gripped the steering wheel tighter as Max let out a soft whimper, his breathing turning erratic. "No, not now," Ethan murmured. He fumbled for his phone with trembling fingers, dialing the nearest clinic he had once heard about from a friend. "Ridgefield Veterinary Clinic, this is Dr. Karen speaking." "This is Ethan Walker," he cut in urgent. I just adopted a dog. He's badly injured. Back leg looks broken and infected. I'm about 20 minutes out." "Stay calm." The woman's voice was steady and professional. "Bring him in. I'll be ready." "Thank you," Ethan replied, then hung up. Rain poured harder. The windshield blurred in seconds. Ethan switched on the wipers, but visibility dropped to barely 10 meters. Still, he sped up. He couldn't let Max die. Not after choosing him. He reached over and touched Max's paw. The dog was still warm, but his breath was shallower by the minute. Ethan began talking to him like to a fallen comrade on the battlefield. "You know, Max, I've lost brothers out there, watched them fade while I couldn't do a damn thing. But this time I'm not letting it happen again. Not to you." Max whimpered, his body trembling faintly. Eyes closed, but an ear twitched like he was still listening. The truck finally hit the paved highway. In the distance, Ethan spotted a small lit sign, faint yellow light in a curtain of white rain. He floored the gas, swerving into the clinic's muddy front lot. The brakes screeched. Tires skidded. Ethan jumped out, dashed to the passenger side, and lifted Max, wrapped in the coat, his whole body cold now. The clinic door swung open. A silver-haired woman in a white coat and gloves rushed out. "Here," Ethan yelled, voice cracking. "He's losing consciousness." "Put him on this table," she ordered, leading him into a side room. Max was laid on the cold, stainless steel table. Under harsh white light, his skinny, soaked body looked even more fragile. Dr. Karen worked fast, checking vitals, inserting an IV, calling for the X-ray machine. "Compound fracture, necrotic tissue on the hind leg. If we don't act within the hour, he won't make it." Ethan looked down at Max, fists clenched white. "Do it, whatever it costs." Dr. Karen studied his face for a moment. She didn't see recklessness, she saw commitment, absolute unwavering commitment. Very well, she nodded. We'll begin surgery immediately. As the operating room doors closed, Ethan stood soaked in the hallway, eyes locked on the red light above the door. He slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out an old military dog tag, the only thing he'd kept from his last deployment. Etched into it, "No man left behind." On the other side of that door, Max was fighting for his life. And Ethan once again was fighting too in his own way. Ethan sat there in the dark, the dim light from the operating room spilling through the crack of the door, casting flickering streaks across the floor. Each second dragged on like an eternity. Outside, the rain continued to fall, the wind whispering through the trees. Every tap against the window felt like the slow beat of time itself. But for Ethan, it was a cruel reminder of how everything seemed to move too slowly. He couldn't sit still. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts of what was happening to Max. The dog, his only companion now, was on that operating table, fighting for his life. But this wasn't just a battle of flesh and bone. It was a fight of spirit, of willpower, and fragile hope. The war had taught Ethan many lessons. He had learned to stare death in the face to survive and to never give up. But between the past and the present, between the wounds he had managed to patch up in himself and the pain he had seen in the eyes of his fallen comrades, he understood one thing all too well. This battle for Max was even harder. The surgical room door clicked open, snapping Ethan out of his daze. Karen, the veterinarian, stepped out. Her face was drawn and tired, but there was a hint of relief in her eyes. "Max made it through the surgery," she said, "but his condition is still serious. His leg was badly fractured and the surrounding tissue was heavily infected. We had to remove part of the bone, but with proper care and monitoring, he should recover." A weight dropped from Ethan's chest, yet he couldn't relax. The most important moment hadn't happened yet. Max hadn't woken up. "Thank you," Ethan said, his voice shaky, whether from exhaustion or fear he wasn't sure. Karen met his eyes with a look of empathy. "You'll need patience. Max will need a lot of time to heal, not just physically but emotionally too." Ethan nodded. He had seen too many fellow soldiers return home with wounds that weren't visible to the eye, but that tore at their souls. Max wasn't any different. The dog had been through hell, and not just on the outside. "Thanks," Ethan said again, but the words barely escaped his lips. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He stayed by Max's side, watching him breathe, his chest rising and falling ever so gently. Though the surgery was over, Max hadn't truly returned, but Ethan could see small signs, minute changes in the dog's body. Maybe, just maybe, he was going to live. But no matter what, the scars left behind would never be only physical. From time to time, Max whimpered softly, shifting his head as if searching for comfort. Ethan reached out and gently stroked the dog's head. He could feel each strand of soft fur beneath his fingers, and in that moment, he understood this wasn't just a dog. This was a soldier. And just like all the other times in his life, Ethan knew he couldn't let a fellow warrior fight alone. He remained there in silence until Max slowly opened his eyes. Those pale yellow eyes, dull and tired, locked onto his. Ethan smiled, though his face still bore the weight of worry and sleeplessness. "Max," he whispered, "you're not alone. I'm right here." Max let out a faint sound, perhaps a sign he recognized Ethan. But aside from that look, he was still too weak to respond. Ethan knew this was only the beginning of a long, hard road. Physical wounds were the easiest part. The deeper battle lay inside the silent, suffocating memories that Max carried. Maybe it wasn't war in the human sense, but for Max, whatever he'd endured had been a war in its own right. In the days that followed, Ethan cared for Max with unwavering dedication. He stayed up late, woke up early, changed dressings, monitored every little sign of progress. Each time Max began to eat a bit more, each time he stood a little steadier, Ethan's heart lifted. And yet there were moments when Max still refused to move from the corner of his bed, eyes wide and anxious, as if fearing the world would collapse all over again. Those looks reminded Ethan of the veterans he'd seen haunted by PTSD. They had to relearn how to trust, how to love, how to feel safe again. Max, just like them, had to fight again, but this time not against an enemy, but against fear itself. Max didn't just need time. He needed a new path, a new strategy to reclaim peace. Ethan knew the answer wasn't only medicine, it was love. A safe place, a sense that the nightmare was over. And so once again, Ethan and Max marched into battle, not with rifles or armor, but with tenderness and time, against the shadows of trauma they fought, together. And this time no one would be left behind. In the days that followed, signs of change began to appear. Max no longer cowered at every loud noise or shied away from every approaching figure. Instead, there was something different in his gaze whenever he looked at Ethan, a glimmer of hope, a trust that had been carefully rebuilt, piece by fragile piece. Ethan noticed it, and pride bloomed in his chest. Every step Max took wasn't just a victory for the dog, it was a victory for both of them. For a man who had weathered pain, loss, and isolation, becoming a pillar of strength for this broken soul was its own redemption. The bond between them had evolved into something unbreakable. One quiet afternoon, as Ethan sat on the couch reading, Max stood up. His legs still trembled slightly, but they held. He walked toward Ethan slowly, carefully, but with intent. His pale eyes no longer held fear, but clarity, confidence. Ethan looked up, stunned. "That's it, Max," he said softly. "You did it. You stepped out of the dark." He reached out and gently stroked Max's head. The dog responded by licking his hand, a simple gesture, but one heavy with meaning. Love. Trust. Still, Ethan knew the past hadn't fully released its grip. Some nights, Max would still jolt awake at distant footsteps or an unexpected creak. He no longer curled into a ball of panic, but the echoes of fear still lingered behind his eyes. One evening, Ethan was watching TV when Max suddenly let out a low growl, staring toward the window. Ethan stood alert. Outside, the night was calm, nothing unusual, but Max saw something or remembered something that stirred anxiety deep inside. "Max," Ethan called gently, voice steady and soft. Max turned, eyes filled with uncertainty, and walked toward him. Every step carried hesitation, but also trust. He nudged against Ethan's leg, leaning into him. Ethan knelt, wrapping an arm around the dog. "It's okay," he whispered. "Whatever it is, it can't hurt you now." Max couldn't answer, but his silence said enough. The past still lived inside him, but he was learning to live beyond it. In the following weeks, Ethan started taking Max outside to quiet places, far from noise or chaos. He spoke to him constantly, touched him gently, gave him a chance to rediscover the world. One day during a walk in the park, Max stopped. His ears perked, eyes focused on a dog in the distance. But he didn't retreat. He didn't hide. He simply stood, curious and calm. Ethan held the leash, waiting, watching. Max didn't run or bark. He just observed, and after a long pause, looked back at Ethan, then kept walking forward, his head held high. "You've come so far, Max," Ethan whispered, his chest tight with emotion. "You've overcome so much." It was as if Max understood. He turned, gave a brief glance, then moved forward again. There was no fear in his steps now, no doubt in his posture. He had faced the darkness and found light. And so their journey, though far from over, had already covered miles. Max was no longer the shattered creature from the auction. He was strong. He was alive. And Ethan, the battle-hardened soldier, had witnessed the rebirth not only of a dog, but of himself. They were no longer alone. They had each other, and with that, there was nothing they couldn't overcome. As time passed, Max was no longer the weak, frightened dog that Ethan had brought home in pain and panic. Now Max was an inseparable part of his life. Every morning when Ethan woke up, Max would already be lying beside him, his pale golden eyes lighting up the moment he saw Ethan stir. The days went by like that, unchanged, except for the deepening bond they shared. Max had become an invaluable companion, a comforting presence in Ethan's loneliest moments. But one day, as Ethan sat on the couch and glanced at the old clock on the wall, he began to reflect on everything he had been through. He remembered the long years of combat, the scars he would carry for life. Yet he also realized that with Max, he had been able to heal wounds he could never have treated alone. Max's resilience had helped him rediscover himself, showing him that in this life, nothing is hopeless when we have someone to help us. Max hadn't just healed his physical wounds, he had mended the ones buried deep in Ethan's soul. Ethan came to understand that love and care could change everything. No matter how painful the past, one day those old scars would fade, leaving only cherished memories and sincere affection. Before long, Max and Ethan became a symbol of resilience and enduring friendship. People in the neighborhood began to notice them, and many couldn't help but admire their special bond. Some approached Ethan to ask about Max, about what he had done to help this dog overcome such hardship. Ethan would always respond with a quiet smile, because he knew he wasn't just raising a dog, he was helping a soul regain its faith in life. And then something miraculous happened. Max became more than just Ethan's companion. He became a friend to the entire community. He was no longer just an abandoned doll, but a symbol of courage, survival, and triumph over life's struggles. One evening, as the crisp autumn air enveloped the small neighborhood in darkness, Ethan and Max sat by the window looking out. The streetlights twinkled like stars scattered across the ground. Max lay curled in Ethan's lap, breathing steadily in perfect sync with his owner's breath. Ethan gazed into Max's golden eyes and suddenly realized that what they had endured together was priceless. Nothing could ever replace this bond. Over the years, he had rediscovered his faith in life, in himself, and in love. "Thank you, Max," Ethan whispered, his voice low and warm. "Thank you for staying by my side." Max looked up at him, his eyes glowing as if he understood every word. He didn't need to respond between them. Everything was already understood. And even without loud declarations or grand gestures, Ethan knew nothing could change this friendship. Max hadn't just changed his life, he had changed the way Ethan saw the world. He no longer felt alone in the long nights, no longer felt despair when faced with hardship. He had Max as a wonderful companion he could trust and love. This love wasn't just a bond between a man and an animal. It was proof of the power of resilience, of overcoming pain, and of finding light in the darkness. Max and Ethan had helped each other heal the invisible wounds, those in the soul that only love and care could soothe. Their journey didn't end there. There were still many challenges ahead, but they would face them together. And with every step forward, they would grow stronger, more steadfast, and love each other more deeply than ever. Together, they knew that nothing was impossible. They had conquered fear, overcome every obstacle, and stepped into a future filled with hope. And in those quiet moments together, Max and Ethan understood that sometimes all life really needs is a friend, and that friendship can change everything. So from a hopeless auction, where no one even glanced at an injured dog, a deep and lasting friendship was born between a lonely veteran and a once broken soul. Max wasn't just rescued, he had become the one who rescued Ethan's heart. Their friendship is proof of one thing. Sometimes healing doesn't require something grand. It just takes a heart willing to love and a second chance to believe again. At Animal Tales Daily, we believe every creature deserves a second chance. And stories like Max and Ethan's remind us of the power of compassion, patience, and above all, unconditional love. If you were touched by this journey, please hit like, subscribe to our channel, and share this video to spread these positive messages to more people. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next magical story. Thank you for joining us today. See you in the next video, where every story is a spark of hope and every life matters.